From a strawberry farm in northern Japan to the country's top seat, Yoshihide Suga is a self-made politician. He's affectionately known as Uncle Reiwa after he announced Japan's new era name last year when the new emperor took the throne. Suga was Shinzo Abe's right-hand man during his 8 years in office and is known as a behind-the-scenes deal-maker. He's also the first Liberal Democratic Party leader who doesn't belong to any political faction. Despite this, or perhaps because of this, he gained backing from 70% of the LDP voters. Experts say Suga's victory will mean continuity for Japan. He brings with him some new policies, including creating a government agency for digital matters and boosting insurance coverage for infertility treatment. But otherwise, he'll likely continue to carry on the Abenomics economic stimulus policies of low interest rates and high government spending. He also wants to revise the pacifist post-war constitution, a key part of Abe's agenda.
We must overcome this crisis so that each person in Japan can feel safe and have a stable living. In order to do that, we need to carry on Prime Minister Abe's measures. I believe it is my mission.
And his former boss is happy to know that his legacy will be carried on.
I think we become one with the same belief. I think he's the most suitable LDP leader in the Reiwa era. Don't you think so?
Suga has less diplomacy experience than his predecessor and will need to balance Japan's alliance with the U.S., mend ties with Asian neighbors like China and South Korea. However, his top priority will be dealing with the coronavirus and its economic fallout. As in many other countries, the economy in Japan has taken a massive hit, suffering its biggest ever slump. There's also the challenge posed by the postponed Tokyo Olympics to be held next year. Suga has promised to expand testing and source vaccines for Japan by the first half of 2021. But the economy was struggling even before the pandemic. The fate of the world's third largest economy is now in the hands of Yoshihide Suga. Mayu Yoshida, TRT World, Tokyo.
Well, for more on this, I'm joined by John Nilsson-Wright. He's a senior lecturer of Japanese politics at the University of Cambridge and is also a senior research fellow for Northeast Asia at Chatham House. Welcome to the program, John. Now, Yoshihide Suga's appointment has been described as a passing of the torch, in that really we can't expect too much change under his leadership. But is that the case? Will it just be business as usual under Suga's leadership?
I think we'll see a slightly different shift. Mr. Suga is known as something of a deficit hawk, so I think he will be keen to try and address the question of Japan's enormous national debt. And there are different ways he can go about doing that. One question is the politically charged issue of the consumption tax, the Japan sales tax, which is at the moment at 10%. Now, that's a political hot potato. Any leader grappling with that issue is going to face a lot of potential unpopularity. But it may be that Mr. Suga feels that it's going to be important. I think he's on record as having said it will inevitably have to be increased. When that will in fact be the case remains open. We also know that Mr. Suga, because of the people around him, his advisors, is minded to look at supply side issues. So perhaps efforts to strengthen the position of small and medium-sized enterprises, efforts to revitalize the rural economy, and in one area, deregulation. He's already shown himself in past positions, he was formerly Minister of Communications, a willingness to grapple with some of those issues. So telecommunication companies which charge very high rates to their consumers may be facing pressure from the new administration to loosen some of those pricings. We may also see, I think, a leader who is perhaps, given his control over the administrative machine, willing to take on some of the existing civil servants. You mentioned COVID-19. COVID-19, of course, led to the outgoing administration seeing a big drop in its popularity, somewhere in the mid-30s. Mr. Suga may be minded to try and distance himself from the policies of his predecessor in this area. He may, for example, decide that he wants to weaken the power of the health ministry, which has been criticized for having responded poorly to the current crisis. But as you rightly point out, continuity and being seen to continue to pursue some of the more successful of Mr. Abe's policies is going to be important to him.
Okay, you mentioned the controversial rises of the sales tax, deregulation. They're all part of Shinzo Abe's economic agenda, which has been dubbed Abenomics, in place since 2012, designed to really revive the stagnant economy at the time. But almost a decade on, do you think Abenomics is still relevant in this day and age for Japan, or should Suga's appointment be seen as an excuse to perhaps take a new approach when it comes to handling the Japanese economy?
I think Abenomics, when you see it in the round, of course, there are three arrows to Abenomics, not only fiscal and monetary policy, but structural reform. And there, I think, Mr. Abe's record is perhaps better than some of his critics give him credit. If you think about Japan's decision to join CPTPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, Mr. Abe's willingness to engage with the agricultural constituency in Japan to introduce policies that were resented and resisted by farmers, that takes a certain amount of political courage. And structural reform, revitalizing localities, ensuring that the elderly's interests in Japan are met, and re-injecting a degree of productivity. The labor market, of course, has been an area where Japan has languished. And Mr. Suga has been identified with modest efforts, for example, to promote very small increases in immigration, a very sensitive topic in a country like Japan, which is quite homogeneous in terms of its population. But something will need to be done to deal with the demographic deficit in Japan if the country is going to find a way of recovering over the long term. So I would expect to see more in those areas.
Okay.
Another area that Mr. Suga is identified with, we may see more efforts to try and open up Japan and send a different signal to the rest of the world.
Can I ask you about Japan's long-term foe, China? We know Shinzo Abe has been quite hawkish towards its neighbour, taking a hard line on many issues, including its wartime past. Do you expect Suga to take a similar approach, given that China is still one of Japan's biggest trading partners? I think trade totaled nearly $140 billion in 2019. So do you expect that hardline approach to continue given the economic crisis that's currently gripping Japan?
I think the preoccupation with the security risk from China that was there under the Abe administration will continue. But even under Mr. Abe, relations with China have always been dubbed, hot economics and cold politics. So even under Abe, the importance of the economic relationship remained front and center, despite all of those concerns about the growing security presence in the East China Sea, the maritime strength of China. Mr. Suga, I think, will continue that. He's made it very clear in his public statements that he won't be pushed around by China. Given his relative lack of experience in foreign affairs, it's important for him to say that. And don't forget also, Mr. Abe isn't going to disappear from politics. He may well retain his seat in Parliament and will continue to advise Mr. Suga on those critical foreign policy issues.
Okay, John Nilsson-Wright from the University of Cambridge and Chatham House, thank you again for joining us.